Okay, pleased to meet you again. So, I actually prepared to insert the diagrams showing the cost structure in England Wales, but as I've said, that disappeared for unknown reasons. So I hurried to retrieve some pertinent chart. There's this one. Can you read the small letters? I'm sorry to present this full context of chart. You can see House of Lords and Judicial Committee of Private Counsel, which is actually supreme in court hierarchy, and the second rank of court is called usually Court of Appeal. And we have Higher Court, which is divided in Chancery Division, Family Division, and Queen's Bench Division, and also some divisional code in interaction. And at the floor level, we have a special and unique course, a majestic course, and the crown court, which is arranged to serve the interest of a crown for some limited context of jurisdiction, a majestic court. And the county courts are a prime instrumentality to administer the civil and criminal justice context. And I have make some more brief about the diagram in detail later. And for a general introduction, I need to get some more points of consideration for your reference. See. Oh, sorry. Hey. I like make excuse of my carelessness. I have to silence the mobile phone in advance before the class. Sorry. Hey, it's still working. So the courts, nevertheless, have continued to retain characteristics associated with the structures formed during the 3 centuries following the Norman conquest. The system, despite its erosion by the creation of hundreds of tribunals, remains essentially unitary. All courts, both civil and criminal, lead to the Court of Appeal and the House of Lords. That actually applies to most administrative tribunals as well. The English system, more than other common law systems, preserves rather extensive appeal rights for those whose initial trials or hearings were before administrative tribunals. It should be noted and continually re-emphasized that although there has been an erosion in the use of the regular or ordinary courts, considering the nature of hearing before administrative tribunals, there is reasonably clear distinction between subject matter. The ordinary courts remain the dominant dispute, resolving authority for conflicts between private citizens. The extensive number of administrative tribunals largely hear what you call public law with more comfort or with civil law trained. They are matters between the private citizen and some governmental body. It is less than a century ago the Dutch made a controversial and much criticized claim that there was no difference between public and private law in England. Nor did England possess an equivalent to the French droit administratif. Certainly, there has never been an attempt to systematically allocate matters between public and private law. Lacking a constitutional document which either reforms the dispute or defines public and private law, the door has been opened for the development of public and private law. The door, public and private a dichotomy. Then now you can just, in England, what one might well label a droit administratif. But it is not separate to the extent it is in France. France has long has special courts for public law matters. Not only the courts of first instance, but a full hierarchy ascending to the Council d'État. The united nature of the English system causes public law matters to be fed into the High Court. Concerned with the proliferation of special tribunals and their separation from the traditional judicial process, the government has appointed a special commission to review this conflict. The France committee report in 1957, the most extensive recent review, led to the Tribunal and Inquiries Act 1958, which permitted judicial review by the low courts of decisions of a number of tribunals, but many decisions remain outside the regular court system. The permitted review is now without some cost, often involving an extensive and expensive delay in the establishment of government-promoted services. But the involvement of the ordinary legal process through judicial review remains to many the only adequate way to protect the rights of individuals affected by the actions of the government. It also assures the barristers of retaining some participation in the resolution of public issues. As public law has increased its reach into the lives of citizens, the solicitors have furthered their role as advocates. It is one thing to be kept out of the regular courts. It is another to shift subject matter jurisdiction away from the regular courts to ones which admit solicitors as advocates. In viewing the High Court, one may ask if law and equity have really been fused. A similar question arises if inquiry is made into the role of Lincoln's Inn as a chancellor in contrast to the type of practice barristers pursue who have chambers in Gray's Middle Temple or Inner Temple. So some division could also be noted between the legal education, as I've introduced. Lincoln's Inn is most notable, and other institutions noted in the name Temple or others may also serve to breed the legal profession. But law and equity have been brought together, if not institutionally and perceptually fused. The fusion is better viewed as one stage of many movements together and apart of characteristics of system and occurring over the centuries. The above-mentioned development of an English common law is an example of some judicial separation. The same is true of the impact of the entry of England to the European communities. The European Court of Justice is the court of last resort on issues of community law. Ordinary courts in England most generally are classified as superior or inferior. Inferior courts, the jurisdiction of which is limited both geographically and according to the nature of subject matter, include those civil and criminal courts, which decide the vast majority of disputes, the county and majestic courts, respectively. Superior court jurisdiction is limited neither geographically nor by value, and exists in Crown Court, High Court, Court of Appeal, and House of Lords. The most important special codes include the Judicial Committee of Private Counsel and Restrictive Practices Code. The structures and jurisdiction of the English court system are less surprising to the American observer than several particular characteristics. As what are they? Tipping points to basics between two systems I've introduced. The following two charts, but it must be reduced into one for this class context. So I have some diagram about details of core system. In substitute, you are referred to this chart. The machinery of a justice in England. So, like the other countries, we have a forced eyesight to the ordinary courts, civil and criminal issues. And the county courts are typically reserved for that purpose. County courts resolve comparative minor civil matters. A county court is the forum in which the English citizen is most likely to appear in civil litigation. Arranged in districts, they convene as courts of first instance, with appeals directed to Court of Appeal for most issues, but to a divisional court of chance or division of the High Court or for the matters of bankruptcy. The Shore and Hundred courts, which developed before the conquest and which largely had declined or perished for lack of use by the Middle Ages, were the historical predecessors of county courts. The modern county court traces origins to the County Court Act 1846 and notably differs from the superior courts by dispersions into every corner of England and Wales, thus providing a local forum for a civil dispute. The County Court Act 1959 broadened the jurisdiction of these courts, extending it beyond simple matters of contract and taught to provide of small estates, equity jurisdiction, and in some courts limited admirable matters and undefended divorces. The county courts are also assigned jurisdiction of some social legislation, but a large amount is confined to special tribunals. We also have a small claim court in terms of civil jurisdiction, but that is particularly limited as compared to the county court in England. Procedure in the county court is simplified in contrast to the high court, and costs are lower. So we also have a special set of a procedure to address the small claims. The context would also be pertinent, but basically, ordinary courts are more comprehensive in comparison with a small claim courts in Korea. The county court judges are professional judges. They are experienced barristers appointed in the same manner as to the superior court by the sovereign at the recommendation of the Lord Chancellor. Assisting these courts is a registrar, a solicitor who serves as a administrative chief of the court, who has authority to hear and decide both pretrial motions and small claims. The registrar actually is second judge for minor cases. Solicitors as well as barristers may appear as advocates before the county courts, an intrusion by the former into the usually well-preserved barrister's domain. The county court is a familiar court to an American observer. With its comparative informality, a single professional judge and its broad jurisdiction over less complex civil disputes involving modest sums, the county court serves as the most important adjudicative body for private civil matters throughout England and Wales. And you can see majestic cause, trials of a summary offenses, committed to the crime code, family proceedings cause, for example, use cause. And this is better for discussion. Mass cause. If the structure and function of county courts appear to differ little from methods of resolving comparative minor civil matters in many common law systems, the structure of most courts may seem most unique. Established throughout England and Wales, most courts primarily are staffed by ordinary but carefully chosen citizens. Part-time lay members sit in collegiate form without a jury to resolve in summary form the great bulk of minor criminal charges. 3 magistrates usually sit, choosing their own chairman. The use of lay as opposed to professional judges for less serious criminal matters has strong historical roots. The return of English soldiers nourished with plundering from the continental wars and the Crusades, and the loss of as much as 1/2 of the population from the Black Death, encouraged a government control of both wages and the free movement of persons. A few of the most influential persons in each community were appointed to keep the peace under the Justice of Peace Act 1361. Nearly 20,000 justices or magistrates served throughout England and Wales, appointed by the Lord Chancellor from nominations of local commissions. The magistrates accept office as a public duty for the prestige of being a part of the judicial system and being permitted to append to the names the initials JP. Is it personal honor? They were compensated in early years, but the remuneration has been abolished. So they serve without compensation. How do you serve that? The lay magistrates are assisted by a low-trained clerk. In large cities, a full-time position, but in smaller towns, a part-time local or solicitor. So actually, we have a pro bono institution within the Department of Law, and we also have some uses of a heat and passion to follow some of a popularity. What do they mean? So it is sublime goal to ensure a criminal justice in the national system should be honorable. Do you agree? The clerk advises on procedural and substantive issues, but at the magistrate request may participate in the discussion leading to judgment. Magistrates are often referred to as the great unpaid, or by critics of the great unlearned, an opprobrium which applies only to the magistrates. So, how do you perceive the Korean context, where the local congressman usually leads a extent of a compensation? Initially, the office was designed as an unpaid occupation. In large cities, full-time, salary, low-trained stipendiary magistrates sit in a magistrate court. The stipendiary magistrates, who are usually solicitors, sit not in a collegiate form, but alone. Criminal jurisdiction is the paramount role of magistrate courts in the system of English justice. Summary offenses, those generally of a minor character, are tried without jury. The benefit is speed and low cost of appearance, in contrast to proceeding before the crime court. The disadvantage is highly probable conviction. A large percentage of majestic cases are violations of law, traffic acts, and regulations, although most persons are charged, plead guilty, and submit by mere specified fines without personal court appearance. So we have a similar system to address the administrative of justice. So you may be issued citation, traffic citation, and you may have the right to argue your case in the courtroom, but you also may be accept the prosecution, so you may not make a court appearance, but just you can just respond to the fines imposed. So how do you fine its convenience? Certain indictable offenses may be tried before a majestic court, but the more serious are tried in the Crown Court. The majestic court plays an important role involving young persons. When the court convenes to hear juvenile offenses, it assumes a status separate from the criminal environment of a majestic court proceedings. The juvenile proceeding is closed to the public. Press coverage is limited, and at least one of the required three lay justices must be a female. This special status carries through to any issue requiring detention, which usually will be in a community home rather than confinement with adult offenders. Jurisdiction of the majestic court extends beyond its principal criminal law responsibility to include minor civil issues involving the collection of specific debts, such as national insurance contributions and utility charges, licensing matters, and some juvenile and domestic issues. The majestic system involves an extraordinary use of laypersons to adjudicate the vast majority of minor offenses committed within the community. It has no significant parallel in the United States, but rather is more closely identified with various commonwealth courts in socialist law systems, although it lacks the political function of such a tribunals. The majestic courts render the justice in an informal setting. The setting is described below by two scholars, person observer of proceedings and majestic. So the context is similar, but in Soviet legal tradition, the judicial branch usually practices proselytizing and a kind of a forging of a communist ethics and a political ideology. Kind of context, ideologically and substantially differs. So we have some additional explanation from a handbook Yardley, titled English Courts of Law. One aspect of the English character which has often aroused the surprise of foreigners in the cheerfulness with which all sections of the community will do others' public work without remuneration. Just as sediment collects at the bottom of a bottle of wine, so work is sickest at the foot of judicial ladder, and at the foot stand the great unpaid, the justice of peace, who try over 97% of all criminal cases. So, in statistics, the portion of a cases actually remarked to occupy 97%, which is predominant. Since the days of Edward IV, a de jure justice have filled the most important place, or rather many places of great importance in the scheme of everyday life. They began not as justice, but as conservators of peace. Statute of Edward III in 1327 and 1330 provide for the appointment of good and lawful men in every county to keep the peace. They must commit to prison those arrested and brought before them, to await the visit of kings, itinerant justices. Statutes of 1344 and 1360 gave them the power to conduct the actual trial of prisoners. And in 1788 it was enacted that they were to hold sessions 4 times a year. These statutes spell disaster to the luckless sheriff, for they sterilized the sheriff's tone, which already by Henry II been deprived of all jurisdiction of serious crime. Denuded even of the cognizance of petty offenses, it perished from inanition, and the triumphant justice took over its entire work. But the justice came to fulfill many other judicial functions, and much enormous work was given to them. So, you can imagine some scene of a Western movie with sheriff and also managers of a peace and justice in the locale. So they may be similar, but can be well divided in many points of. The vast majority of justices are unknown and unknown in the law and unpaid. Though the Lord Chancellor in 1964 instituted a scheme for the compulsory training of new magistrates, which came fully into force in 1966 and is now regulated by the Administrative Justice Act 1973 and is quite extensive in content. So you have the name learned hand. Have you come across the word, the name? Learned hand is one of a eminent justice, which is notorious to spell out many enlightening views and opinions about law and justice, actually serving the federal justice in the United States, federal judges in the United States. How do you perceive if the judges most a principal factor would come from ethics and conscience of mind rather than knowledge or learning? It is in some cases simple and most properly attended by conscience and some kind of basic concept of justice and social understanding of the locality or a major stream of cultures, and so a professional knowledge in some cases may not be necessary. Do you agree? Every now and then we find a retired judge or other eminent lawyer on a local branch, but the qualities which carry most weight were those lieutenant in making a recommendation, a character, experience, long residence in the neighborhood, and a reputation for devotion to the interests of inhabitants. So we have the context. On points of law, the justices are kept on an even keel by the advice of clerk to the justices, who must, on Justices of Peace Act 1949, be a trained lawyer, and who since 1970 has been empowered to deal with certain matters by himself. These include the issue of summonses, the adjournment of hearing with consent of the parties, and allowing further time for payment of sums enforceable by a magistrate court. A few justices are both trained and paid for the Crown, on the advice of Lord Chancellor, appoints metropolitan stipendiary magistrates for the metropolis of London, and on request from any other local council, a stipendiary magistrate for that area. To be eligible for one of these posts, a person must be a barrister or solicitor of 7 years standing. Their criminal work consists mainly of the trial of the vast mass of non-indictable crimes, which Parliament continually swells by fresh additions. It should also be noted that the accused has the right to be tried by jury if he so wishes for any non-indictable offense for which he might be imprisoned for more than 3 months. But in all cases of indictable crime, even of homicide, the initial stages are transacted before magistrates, conduct a preliminary inquiry, and will dismiss the case where they consider that there is not sufficient evidence to go before jury. Even if they do so, however, a bill of indictment may still be presented under the direction or with consent of High Court judge. Two decades later, the view had altered considerably. Magistrates never made their decisions alone, and the law was changing to reflect the necessary role of the clerk. The view in the East Korea case that the decision should not be that of justices and the clerk, but that of justice alone, was overturned. First, the notion of the role of the clerk as severely limited was eroded by suggesting that legislation has become more complex and the magistrate should not be discouraged from seeking the help of the clerk on law and practice issues. Later, when a magistrate bench overruled the clerk's opinion as to the endorsement of a defendant's driving license, the court stated that the justices must accept the advice of the clerk in such instances. The Magistrates Association now recommends to its members that in all but the most routine cases, the clerk should be consulted before the verdict and sentencing. And we turn to see the High Court. What is the nature of this court and what scope of jurisdiction they entertain? Let's see. When we speak of Royal Court of Justice, usually we mean the High Court and the Court of Appeal housed in an imposing building on the Strand in London. The Supreme Court of Judicature Act 1873 created the High Court by bringing together the courts of civil jurisdiction which had been formed shortly after conquest. The High Court was constituted in 5 divisions: Chancery, Probate, Divorce, and Admiralty, Queen's Bench, Common Pleas, and Exchequer. Common Pleas and Exchequer were merged into Queen's Bench Division in 1880. The Courts Act 1971 abolished the Probate, Divorce, Admiralty Division, dividing its responsibilities among Queen's Bench, Chancery, and newly created a Family Division. So we can confirm the long tradition traced back to Norman conquest, which has persisted until the enactment of a 1980s. This divisional structure is partially illusory. Each of the 3 divisions theoretically has equal jurisdictional competency, although the rules of the Supreme Court express an allocation of matters to separate divisions. Matrimonial cases in the High Court are heard in the Family Division, and Chancery is assigned numerous matters which have a traditional equity nature. A High Court judge is assigned to any division, nevertheless may exercise jurisdiction over an issue which, under the rules of Supreme Court, technically is allocated to another division. The Chancery Division, presided over by Lord Chancellor, almost always sits in London. Chancery judges are not noted for traveling on circuit, although the Courts Act permits sessions of any division to be held anywhere in England or Wales. Chancery tends to concentrate on issues of an equitable nature, earlier assigned to its predecessor, the Court of Chancery, including estate administration, trust, mortgages, certain interest in land, partnership dissolution, and bankruptcy of companies, and some revenue matters. It is a limited appellate jurisdiction, allowing a single judge to hear appeals from the Commissioner of Inland Revenue, or two judges to see for appeals of bankruptcy decisions from a county court. By far, the most revenue appeals. The family division, a president is chief judge, has original jurisdiction of matrimony, legitimacy, adoption, a guardianship, and various disputes between spouses. Its limited appellate jurisdiction involves guardianship, adoption, matrimonial, and affiliation appeals from majesties and county courts. The broadest civil jurisdiction, original and appellate, is assigned to the Queen's Bench Division. It also is given limited criminal appeals. The Queen's Bench broader jurisdiction, encompassing many contract and tort actions, is attributable to its being the successor to three of the original divisions of the early High Court: Queen's Bench, Common Pleas, and Exchequer. Additionally, it is charged with admiralty jurisdiction, a unique function evolving from the transfer of admiralty issues from the former probate, a divorce, and admiralty division to Queen's Bench in the 1971 reform. By far, the largest number of cases before the High Court are heard in London. Although the widely dispersed county courts dispose of most minor civil matters, the more complex cases of higher value tend to be tried in London, much due to the concentration of barristers in London. But the High Court judges in the Queen's Bench Division to see throughout the country, often hearing High Court cases on a circuit which has scheduled additionally the same judges to see for criminal matters in local crown courts. Civil appellate jurisdiction of Queen's Bench is limited, involving a single judge deciding certain appeals from tribunals and from interlocutory orders of Queen's Bench Division masters. Two or more Queen's Bench Division judges may hear some civil appeals from majestic courts or from the limited civil jurisdiction of the Crown Courts. The Queen's Bench Division is the only division of the High Court with any criminal jurisdiction. In some cases, majestic courts adjudicate civil issues which accompany the criminal offense. So they may appeal to the High Court. Two or three judges may sit as an appellate court in limited appeals from the majestic courts or Crown Court. Complaints about the High Court are not dissimilar to complaints about the regular courts in many systems. They are limited either to England or even common law systems as a group. They relate to costs, delay, and procedures which are complex and perceived more as obstacles than as assistance in achieving a just result. But some of the concerns regarding the High Court relate to its structure and the residue of jurisdictional rivalries which began with the formation of central courts not long after conquest. There have been the two major court reforms noted above, but there has never been a reform based on the proposal that the whole court system should be arranged with one primary goal: to provide the best system of justice. There are too many obstacles for such a proposal to succeed. Too many vested interests, too much judicial infrastructure to alter, too much in cultural acceptance of system as at least adequate. The legal institutions of nation bear the scars of history, and also some gold stars and medals of achievement. Such characteristics should be even more apparent in England, where the courts have existed with a tracing of past for nearly a millennium. The following commands from Jackson on the High Court would be enlightening, but for this class purpose, I have to curtail the discussion and like to have you learn some brief of a crime codes in general understanding of the code system. See, you can see the crime code in chart. Have you designed the small letters? Here is crown. Here it is. Trace of indictable offenses appears from majuscules fall within the jurisdiction of Crown Court. You can see the Crown Court is a superior court of criminal jurisdiction on a level comparable to the civil jurisdiction of the High Court. The divisions of the High Court have evolved over centuries, however. While the Crown Court was created by the Courts Act 1971, it is nevertheless part of an evolutionary process of criminal courts. Hearing indictable offenses, the more serious crimes, the Crown Court has replaced quarter sessions and assizes. The latter were local courts. The organization and administration varying throughout the country. Special criminal courts convene in several of the large cities. The Central Criminal Court, 1834, created the famous Assize Court for Greater London, popularly known as the Old Bailey. The geographic distribution of the English population was altered when urbanizations accelerated in the late 18th century, and the very different characteristics of local criminal courts became apparent. Uniformity was so desirable and best achieved through a national system of criminal courts with some consistency in structure and administration. The Court Act 1971 established a single superior criminal court made part of the Supreme Court of Judicature and designated the Crown Court. The Crown Court is convened throughout the year in contrast to the abolished quarter sessions. There was no unification of judicial qualification when the court structure was changed. The Crown Court cannot be said to have its own judges. The judges rather consist of all the judges of the High Court, pro-circuit judges, recorders, and justices of peace. They sit alone. It is possible for a collegiate form to convene, but it does not tend to happen. A justice of peace may serve if there is also a judge of High Court present, but the former sit principally when there is a hearing on an appeal or an issue of a committal for sentence. Supplementary to the jurisdiction of the court of the principal indictable offenses are its roles for appeals from a majuscules and sentencing a criminal after conviction in a majuscule. A majuscule may transfer sentencing to the Crown Court if the majus believe their own sentencing power are inadequate considering the severity of the crime. The question of who sits in the Crown Court is indeed somewhat confusing. The English experience is unique. Tracing criminal and a civil jurisdiction from the most minor to the most major of issues surely must be puzzling for a French or West German lawyer. The issues are divided in France and West Germany. There is less confusion between the latter nations and England with regard to who sits, what they are called, why there is more use of lay judges for criminal but professional judges for civil matters, and where the courts sit in the High Court structure. Jackson discussed some of change occurring in the past 2 decades and the remaining complexes. So the Jackson actually presented some briefs about the motion of justice in England in the point we considered in the brief. And so, you may face some of unique cases where the court opinion rendered the final disposition of case by referring to the Crown Court on any others. For illustration, we have some cases involving a fundamental point of a meditation between a humanity and a justice. The case involves a sinking of a vessel, and the seamen encountered extreme circumstances with some seamen killed a boy to subsidize the food for survival. It is very cruel and raises a shock for the public in the period time, and actually the normal criminal code cannot have a definite say about this position. So it is very extreme circumstances where a person cannot rely on their conscience or some operation of a human elements or sensibility and adherence to normal dynamism. But so the sensibility of justice and a proper standard of conduct discontinued in to meet that extreme and the circumstances posed in peril. So, how do you assess the situation? Are the cruel seamen to be punished in a first-degree murder, or are the capital punishment should be rendered to administer for a proper administration of justice? How do you perceive the situation? Actually, that kind of delicate issue, which is fundamental and also intrinsic to address a unique areas of a keen justice, may well be available to the jurisdictional crown court. Do you agree? So, what is Court of Appeal? You can see notation in letter designating Court of Appeal. It is divided into two branches: civil division and a criminal division. One criminal division deals with the appeals from Crown Court, and civil division is assigned to respond to appeals from High Court and County Courts. The Court of Appeal is part of a Supreme Court of Judicature and is grouped as Court of Appellate jurisdiction. Its jurisdiction extends to both a civil and criminal matters. A civil jurisdiction involves appeals from the High Court, a county courts, and certain administrative courts and tribunals. The criminal side primarily hears appeals from the Crown Courts. The court is thus the point at which nearly all disputes merge if further proceedings are intended, a feature characteristic of most common law systems, in contrast to having parallel levels of appeal for several judicial hierarchies. The Lord of Justice's appeal are the principal judges of Court of Appeals. The Master of Laws and the Lord Chief Justice are the administrative heads of civil and criminal matters, respectively. The Lord Chancellor, the Lord Chief Justice, the Master of Laws, the President of Family Division of High Court, the former Lord Chancellor, and the Lords of Appeal in ordinary are all ex officio judges. During times of substantial caseload, the Lord Chancellor may temporarily add a judge of the High Court, illustrative of the absence of absolutes in the identification of certain judicial positions with a single specific court. Appellate decisions are rendered in collegiate form by 3 judges, although in some limited circumstances 1 or 2 judges may appear, usually to determine application for leave to appeal. If a particularly important issue of law is before the court, 5 or more judges may sit, although the resulting decision possesses no greater authority than one emanating from the more common 3-judge court. Both the Court of Appeal, the House of Lords, acting as an appellate court, sit in London, but the nature of the appeal differs from the trial. It becomes more like the civil law processes. It is largely documentary in the United States. There is a concentration on arguments of law supported by prepared briefs. But as we'll see, there is thus less of burden on the parties. Usually, only the lawyers attend the proceedings and Court of Appeal, and so it actually is not a trial in the common law sense of an event. So English appeal differs from the point. It is actually not a trial. There has been little demand in England to decentralize the appellate stage, nor has there been such demand in states in the United States where appeals may be centralized in the capital city. But in many states, there is an appeal stage which is decentralized. So, in your study of American legal system, you have been available of a number of circuit codes in order, and which is basically geographical in its distribution of jurisdiction. And also we have over 90 federal district codes, which is subject to the appellate review of a circuit code, 13 circuit codes. One circuit code is actually a special code exclusively assigned to deal with international trade issues. And we return to the scene of House of Lords, since it is actually upper body of a parliament, but also as the responsibility as a Supreme Court of Great Britain. So they serve and expected to execute dual responsibilities in terms of a British constitutional framework. The juridical law of the House of Lords antedates as legislative law. So initially, the House of Lords had been committed to the judicial preserve, which is essential to support the sovereign power in the context. But few of its early judicial functions, as part of career justice, survive. Its current role is chiefly as senior appellate court. Decisions of House of Lords prior to the 19th century did not command considerable respect. They often were rendered by House of Lords members who were not lawyers. It remains possible, in theory, for the entire House of Lords to hear an appeal, including both its legislative and judicial members. But in practice, decisions are now rendered by the Appellate Committee of the House of Lords, which include only professional members. The judges include the presiding Lord Chancellor and the Lords of Appeal in ordinary, called law lords. The law lords are chosen either by direct appointment from among the most eminent barristers or by elevating a judge from a lower court. Almost always, the appointments are made from the Court of Appeal. A benefit of such appointment is a life peerage, to the degree offsetting the rather modest salary. One or two of the law lords are from Scotland, are assigned to appear from the highest Scottish Court of Appeal, the Court of Session. So it is a very honorable position, and also will be compared to the federal judges in the United States, who are a prestige in tenure and compensation. Federal judges normally attain the lifetime tenure and also ensured of a independence of judiciary in terms of their personal and a personal status, and also execution of their official duty. The elevation to the House of Lords from the Court of Appeal is not considered by all to be a promotion in anything but a prestige and title. Lord Denning, who moved from the Court of Appeal to the House of Lords and then back to head the Court of Appeal as Master of Laws, said this about the elevation. We are interested in the House of Lords in its judicial capacity. We have noted above its role as a legislative body. There is some overlap of the functions of its members. The persons designated a law lord or Lord of Appeal in ordinary is a member of the House of Lords and secondary a judge in the chamber, but is appointed to be a judge rather than a legislator. If he does participate in the legislative sessions, and many do actively, he is not to speak on matters which involve party politics. He is supposed to limit his activities to legal issues and to voting on social questions. This role contrasts with the participation of members of the House of Lords who are not law lords, who might wish to sit when the law lords he appears. They may not. In the middle of the 18th century, it was established by convention that lay peers do not vote on a judicial appeals. At the head of the law lords is Lord Chancellor, appointed by the Prime Minister to serve for the duration of the government. He has multiple roles, so they go the same way to serve a government in a united fashion. So Lord Chancellor depends on the survival of government. He is an administrator. He rarely hears cases with the law of laws. So that is a point of a comparison where United States has actually used terms, tools to address the political institutions. So many independent terms were preserved in the Constitution. Actually, that is not easily available in the context of parliamentary system. So he presides both in the House of Lords in its judicial capacity and of Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, has Transfer Division of the High Court, is an ex-officio member of the Court of Appeal, and is responsible for the county court system, all in addition to other judicial duties. But he is also a member of the executive, usually in service in the Prime Minister's cabinet. And finally, the Lord Chancellor is a legislator. He sits as Speaker of House of Lords. The setting for peers before the House of Lords is far less formal than in the lower courts on the Strand. The judges appear in business shoes, sitting on the same level as counsel in what appears a more conference room than a courtroom. But some of the trappings of the colorful dress of the English system are present. Barristers with the robes and wigs. If the case is one of those few heard in Chamber of House of Lords, then there is greater formality. But those cases amount to less than 10% of the appeals of the House of Lords. The law rules are given by the clerk, a single-page summary outlining the case and the issue presented on appeal. It additionally states the names of the appearing barristers. Oral argument is presented much in the same manner as in Court of Appeal, and the hearing may go on for 2 weeks or more, although most do not extend beyond several days. The time for oral appeal at this highest court is significantly longer than the limited oral argument allowed by the United States Supreme Court. But much of time of the appeal involves reading from the record and from cases supporting the barrister's arguments. At the close of the oral argument, unlike the Court of Appeal, where judgments are rendered immediately, the judges tend to reserve their decision. In rare cases, they may decide the case, but provide an opinion with the reasoning at some future debate. The law rules have some limited time for work in chambers. They generally say 4 days a week, and if a case ends before the end of the day, they may decide not to go on to the next case, but rather spend time working on opinions in chambers. Each of the law rules writes a separate opinion and sends it to the other judges who sat on the case. If their views are quite different, they may meet and attempt to reconcile those differences, but they do so informally. Decisions of the House of Lords illustrate that there is little attempt to render a harmonious decision or one which might be said to be a decision of a court rather than of judges. The decision is for the judges to state individual views in their separate opinions. Some half-dozen weeks after the hearing, the law rules sit to announce opinions in an atmosphere far more formal than during the oral argument. The meeting takes place in the regular chamber, where the laws meet in legislative session, and the law chancellor speaks from the woolsack after session is opened by prayers. But the only persons likely to be in attendance are judges who sat on the appeal and barristers and solicitors involved in the cases. The judges read their separate opinion in each case, except for the rare occasion when they have agreed on an opinion for the entire court. It can be a time-consuming practice, often taking 2 or more hours, but some of the law rules may omit portions of the opinion, moving rapidly to their reasons for their position. At the end of the reading, the law chancellor tallies the vote and the appeal is concluded. The jurisdiction of House of Lords is predominantly appellate, and is almost exclusively related to matters from the Court of Appeal in England, although it is also the final Court of Appeal for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Either the Court of Appeal or the Appeals Committee of the House of Lords must grant leave for an appeal. Since the Administrative Justice Act 1969, some limited leapfrogging appeals are permitted, directed from the High Court to the House of Lords. So we also charged with some other sections dealing with Judicial Committee of Private Counsel, special courts and tribunals, which need to be differ to next class, but are some more points of a introduction about the matter in the Friday on Friday class, but For the final point of thought, we see some brief context between England and the European Court of Justice. The entry of England into European communities by enactment of the European Communities Act 1972 added a new judicial institutions of an uncertain scope. But it was obvious to the observer that the European Court of Justice would be an important part of the system. Not a new lowly tribunal where the appeals fed into regular court system, but a court which is for certain issues not just decide the House of Lords from its lofty setting above the pen. Would the laws quite accept this notch? English judges have had long years of protecting their territory, first as barristers fending off the persistent solicitors who wish additional rights of advocacy, then as judges keeping jurisdiction of as much subject matter as possible, and at least retaining substantial rights of appeal. With the entry of England, the 1957 Treaty of Rome became part of the law of the United Kingdom. Some comment has been made earlier in this class regarding the sovereignty of Parliament and the community. So, at this point, we are interested principally in the community as new institutional structure, and especially in the EDU.CONSULTING, the European Court of Justice. Because the final authority for the interpretation of community law is the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg, an important part of English law is being developed by a judicial institution, not only with the composition which differs from the ordinary English superior courts, but with a strong balance in favor of judges from civil law systems. One should not identify the court as a civil law court, however, but it does possess a structure likely to create a community law with predominant influence from civil law jurisprudence. Of interest is the extent to which the decisions of the European Court will bear a resemblance to decisions of civil law courts, disclosing a more abstract nature which may render them less unable as precedent than decisions from common law systems. This nevertheless presupposes that the decisions of the court have some precedential value. Nothing in the organization structure of courts suggests such as intention and the pattern of decisions support this view. One may well expect, however, that judges of court trained in the common law may place greater emphasis on the past decisions of court, particularly where they contain substantive analysis rather than abstract statements. The addition of the European Court of Justice to English judicial institutions is one of the most important changes in English common law in several centuries. The lack of an enforcement procedures for the European Court of Justice, however, may mean that its decisions will have less impact in England than decisions of domestic courts. There is evidence of this to date in some EEC nations. Several decisions of the European Court have been ignored by nations against whose interests they have been rendered. So, actually, it's just a formality that the European Court of Justice have some hierarchical command based on the European law. But as you see, the international law has some delicate points between the two dimensions of laws. That is, depends on practice of each nation, and particularly the continental states usually respect the international law in more hierarchical terms, preempting each nation state, particularly true in the context of European Court of Justice, and also WTO institution has some significant implications about a multilateral trade agreements, and so it is usually ascribed as one of constitutional regime to monitor and check up with the trade policies and domestic measures on their areas. Traditionally, United Kingdom is very disposed to some kind of a national primacy against the international laws. So they see both norms in equal terms, and have generally a balanced views in terms of hierarchy between two norms, and in some cases they more strongly advance the national interests in by applying the national laws, which is very tactical and avoid some technical, by means of technical issues, some delicate points in a conflict. So the practice is actually interesting, and some it is not dominant practice. They usually respect the European laws, but in some delicate area of a national policy, the means and tactics of a legal technicians may well operate to avoid some undesired impact on the national context. That is an interesting point, and you may get further on that aspect for your independent research. And I have skipped the two sections which to be done in the next class. Okay, thank you for your attendance, and see you on Friday, the class on Friday.